guys, I am here today with my Q3 wrap up. I cannot believe that it is this point just in the year in general. Where did it go? As per usual, I have a really long list of books. This is my wrap up for July, August, and September, and it's really going to reflect the fact that I went back to school because I read 29 books in July, 22 books in August, and 9 in September. So Q4 will probably also look fairly anemic, but that means that maybe this video for Q4 won't be a bajillion years long. A girl can dream. So this is also going to feature a lot of Megan March. I know I said that in my last wrap up, but this is also just, I think according to Storygraph, because they now rank your most read authors of the year, I think I read 30 books total by Megan March. I just kind of went down the rabbit hole and didn't come out. So we're going to talk more about those. Starting off right in the beginning in July, I read her Dirty Billionaire trilogy. So this is Dirty Billionaire, Dirty Pleasure, and Dirty Together. This is actually one of the series that starts off one of her major worlds. There is a billionaire, obviously, and he sleeps with the female lead for a one-night stand and has such a mind-blowingly good time with her that he puts out an ad essentially saying that he wants to marry her, like proposes through the newspaper. And of course, they don't even really know each other. They don't really know their names. I actually really enjoyed it, and it was good to finally see some characters that had popped up in some other Megan March stories. And if you are going to start one of her series, this is one of the places that you want to start. I really enjoy Megan March's characters. I think is one of the things. I enjoy her plots, but her characters, there's always, you know, at least one, if not both of the main characters really just really like think they're cute little cinnamon rolls. So that's that series. I also finished the Beneath series. So there are 7 of these, and I read some of them in Q2, and then in Q3 I read Beneath This Mask, Beneath This Ink, Beneath These Chains, and Beneath These Scars. I had to wait for some of these. These were on hold, so I didn't read them all like in order. And the Beneath series is really interesting because they're all connected, and eventually they connect out to the world of Dirty Billionaire. But I do think that they have some of her more interesting, like familial connected plots, and something that I like in a lot of my romance novels is if there's, you know, there's a level of the romance, but then there's a level of something else happening. And I really like when it's in either one or both of the characters' lives or their families, or just, you know, it's a broader story than just a romance. And I think the Beneath series in particular does that really well, despite the fact that there's 7 of them and they're all connected. None of them felt boring or a retread. So I just liked those as well. So in July, I also read what I think is Megan March's most ridiculous series that I have ever read. And it is Richer Than Sin, Guilty Is Sin, and Reveling in Sin. And these books, so I mean, romances are always a little bit of a soap opera, but these books are just the most ridiculous soap opera ever. Like, just when you think something more ridiculous can't happen, it does. And having read so many of Megan March's books, it felt out of character, because these are also connected to a couple of her other series that I read back in Q3. So this isn't the first time the male lead has showed up, and it's not the first story set in this universe. So to have it just go like so far off into like Days of Our Lives, wild, wacko, like people are poisoned, fake dead, fake pregnancy, murder, betrayal, like I was like, what is happening? So that is not one of her series that I would recommend starting with, but if that kind of book is your thing, then maybe, I guess. But I'm just so glad that I had read other stuff by her. Wow, that one is so far out there. I've never seen her do anything like that, and I haven't seen her do anything like that since. It's just, oh boy, that was a lot. So Michaela and I also read a book in July called River of Teeth by Sarah Gailey. This is a novella, and we read it for our Betwixt the Books reading challenge as a book with non-binary representation. And I'm not going to go into that too much because we did a whole review with each other, but one line pitch for this, it is Hippo Cowboys. That's right, it takes place in an alternate 1800s Louisiana where in order to try to subdue the frontier, people released hippos into the wild, and now the hippos rule Louisiana, basically. So cowboys have to go in to wrangle the hippos. It's amazing. The cast is great. I wish it wasn't a novella. Sorry to interrupt the Megan March parade, but after that I went back to Megan March and I read her, this is a duet, Real Dirty and Real Sexy. So this is a duet that features a character who shows up in the Dirty Billionaire series, and I didn't think that he factored enough into that to get his own story, but here we are. Megan March is really good at managing to expand her own universe. This one is focused on a country megastar who is about to propose to his really flighty, terrible girlfriend, and then she cheats on him. And so he basically runs off into the, wilderness trying to figure out how his life went so wrong, and meets a down on her luck bar owner who has a really great voice. So it was not a series that I expected. I thought there were other characters that would get their own stories who didn't, but it was really sweet. I had to look up which of the duets this was, or duologies, because I had kind of forgotten. So it's not one of her more memorable ones, but if you like country music, I guess, maybe it's for you. So I also then read after that Megan March's most latest series, which is the Legend trilogy. That's The Fall of Legend, House of Scarlet, and The Fight for Forever. And this is the thing about reading so much of what someone has written. I think this series is like a really good encapsulation of Megan March like evolving as a writer, I think. So this one is the main character's name, the dude, is Legend, and he owns a club and he's trying to go legit, but he's having some issues, and so he entraps, and I'm not going to tell you how because it's great, this socialite essentially, who is trying to prove that she is more than just the money that has been bestowed upon her by rich parents. Her mother was a model. She's trying to be an entrepreneur. And between the two of them, they're just very scrappy people from two different walks of life who, there's a little bit of like a mafia, dark suspense, guns come out kind of a thing. But it's just a really good story, like a romance story between the two of them who come from different places, who have trust issues, but who are also trying really hard to stand up on their own 2 feet, independent of other people. And I really enjoyed that. I think it was a really solid character arc story, and I'm always a sucker for those in my romances. So ping-ponging off of that, I read another duology, which was Black Sheep and White Knight. This is connected again back to the world that started with Dirty Billionaire and was a story that did not go the way that I thought it was going to. This is because I read this duology before an inciting incident in another one of the duologies happened, and I was really lost about how this one character, Cannon, went from being the business partner of the main character from Dirty Billionaire to a mafioso. This is one case where I think maybe try to read these in order. For the most part, it hasn't bothered me, but in this particular case, like I had really been thrown for a loop reading an earlier one and then reading this later one and not the connective tissue in between. So there is that, but yeah, in this one, there is Cannon, who is a mafioso's son, and he is trying to get his father to A, not get murdered in a gang war, and B, turn his father's businesses legit. And it's not working well, and then he hires this woman to work at one of his clubs. His father wants to turn her into his new mistress, which is awkward because she's an undercover reporter trying to get the dude thrown in jail, and Cannon says, "Not in my house," and has to fake date her, which of course turns into real dating. But read these series in order. Do it. Skipping bizarrely over to some nonfiction, I also read Evil Geniuses, The Unmaking of America by Kurt Anderson. I talked about this in one of my latest supplementals videos, which I will link. And Kurt Anderson is also the person who wrote Fantasyland, which was a book that I really enjoyed. The Unmaking of America is, I think, really interesting, connective, like continuity reading for anyone who read Jane Mayer's Dark Money, but without the investigative journalism side. It's not that there aren't facts in here, absolutely, there is tons of research that has been done, but it's more narrative and it was slightly harder to follow. So you can check that out, the supplementals video, for my full review on that, but yeah, I didn't like that one as much as Fantasyland. Okay, so somewhere in the middle of that, my camera overheated, so if the lighting is different now, sorry, it's later. Where was I? Okay, another Megan March duology. Shocking. I read Real Good Man and Real Good Love. Now, this was surprising to me. Again, it's another duology connected to the Dirty Billionaire series, and it was not a character that I thought was going to get his own story. But in this one, it is a character that shows up in the original trilogy, and his name is Logan, and he comes from a small town, went off, joined the army, came back, and now works on cars. And so he also shows up in the one about the country music star, and he ends up falling for the like socialite friend of another character from one of the other stories. And you know, they're a total mismatch, but they make it work when the socialite character has to end up in his small town for a little bit. So it was a very cute opposites attract story, and definitely more character stuff going on in this one that was more interesting. So this is one that I remember reading that I was like, why is this character getting his own story? And then it ended up actually being really sweet and really cute. So I'm glad that one happened. Moving on to another nonfiction title. This was His Very Best, Jimmy Carter, A Life by Jonathan Alter. This came up in my last Presidents. I actually made an episode of my Presidents Actual Challenge, and this is a very brand new cumulative biography of the life of Jimmy Carter. And it was really, really interesting, and I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of really positive things to say about that, so you can watch that for more. But I think one of the things that I didn't like was in the audiobook, it was kind of hard to follow. So while I would highly recommend this as one of the only and one of the best, so I've heard, cumulative biographies of the life of Jimmy Carter, I would maybe read it. The organization of the book does not lend itself to an audiobook considering how long it is. On to a much less dense, much less substance autobiography. I read On the House of Washington memoir by John Boehner. John Boehner was a Speaker of the House. He's a Republican, so he was Speaker of the House before Paul Ryan, and he resigned/retired right when Trump came into office. He has a lot of things to say about Tea Party Republicans, such as Ted Cruz, and also a lot of things to say about Democrats, such as Nancy Pelosi. It's funny, but it was very lacking in substance and very lacking, honestly, in things that I was most interested in reading. Talked about that in that supplementals episode I mentioned earlier. Go check that out for more, but it was an interesting insight, but very, very low on the Washington part of the memoir. I actually read a romance novel that wasn't written by Megan March. I read Incense and Sensibility by Sonali Dev. This, I guess, is actually the third book in a series that she's writing called The Rajas, and I did not like this at all. The writing style just was very clunky. It was very dry. It just did not work for me, like, at all. Did not jive with the characters. Just the writing in general was just poor. All of the books in this series are plays on Austen novels, so Incense and Sensibility, i.e. Sense and Sensibility. So maybe if you were interested in going back, you know, it's like a diverse retelling of those series, maybe, but I just can't get past the writing. It just was not for me. So I finished it. I don't know why, but ew. Also, if there's clicking in the background, my partner is home because my camera overheated and he's trying to live his life, so ignore the clicking. Going from Incense and Sensibility, which was terrible, I read Beth O'Leary's The Road Trip, which was fabulous. I did a whole review of that book, and I'm either going to link them above in the video, or after I run out of cards, I'll put them in the description of the video. But I cannot tell you how highly I loved this book. Beth O'Leary was an author who had been recommended to me quite a bit, mostly for her book, The Flat Share. But this book, it's nominally about two people who broke up in a terrible fashion several years ago, and now they're thrown back together on a road trip to go to the wedding of a mutual friend. And they are literally stuck in this confined space, and there's a lot of emotions to untangle. And there's also a lot of things happening in both of their friend groups, their families. There's a lot of emotion in this book. It's very sweet. Go watch the full review for more, but I highly recommend it. Flipping back to another duology connected to the Dirty Billionaire series, this one more directly. That's Dirty Girl and Dirty Love. This is about the sister of the guy from Dirty Billionaire who is trying to live her own life, kind of disconnected from her very rich brother and having a struggle. When she was young, she dated this guy who was totally working class and thought that he wasn't good enough for her. They broke up. He went off to become somebody and ended up becoming a famous actor, and now he's back for her. But there are some things about his life that she doesn't know that's related to the whole mafia theme that goes through most of these. And so I do like reconnection, second chance books. I think they're just sometimes, if they're written right, far richer than, you know, a brand new relationship at times, because there's like things to unpack. But this one was just okay. It was fine. It made a book I had already read make more sense, because I was like, oh, this is how these characters all fit together. So it was fine. This book is not connected to this series, but it's called Dirty Talker by Mira Lynn Kelly, and it is another book in the Slayers hockey series that I recommended in my sports recommendation video. The thing about these books is that I honestly don't remember anything about this. They are a fine way to spend your time, but after they're done, they're fairly forgettable. So it was just a new book that I saw, a new entry in this series, so I read it. If you like hockey novels, I don't remember a thing about it. But for a better review of the series, check out that recommendation video, and maybe you'll want to start it for yourself. So doing a total flip over to something else, I read These Honor Dead, How the Story of Gettysburg Shaped American Memory by Thomas Desjardins. I did a full review of this in my supplementals episode, but I also mentioned it in my road trip reading list, because I went on a road trip over the summer and I went to Gettysburg for the second time, and the Too Long Didn't Read on this, if you don't want to go watch the supplementals episode, is that this book is what I'm interested in. It is how memory, historical memory, is created, and how the monuments and the stories and the histories were collected and disseminated and shared, and whose voice got to be heard and whose didn't. It's not about the history of the battle. It's not about really the Civil War. It's what happened after, and who got to tell what stories, and what stories do we still tell today. I really enjoyed it. If you're all interested in that, the book itself is a little dry, but I was just so interested in the concept that that's okay. Okay, we've managed July. In August, I read 22 books, starting with I Kissed a Girl by Jeanette Alexander. This is an LGBTQIA romance, and I wanted this to be so much better than it was. I did do a full review, which you can watch, but the skinny is that there is a girl who is a makeup artist, and horror is her favorite thing in the world, and she gets the opportunity to not only work as a makeup artist on a horror movie set, but also to work with her like favorite movie actress of all time. And they start flirting. The movie actress, there's more to her than meets the eye. Turns out that she doesn't really want to be a horror actress. I don't know. It had such a fun concept, but the relationship itself really didn't sell me. I ended up thinking like one of them didn't deserve the other. So you can go watch that full review, but not my favorite. Ha ha ha. That was followed by Meet You in the Middle by Devin Daniels. And the idea behind this romance novel is a Democrat and a Republican falling in love. This is maybe one of the worst books that I've read this year. I'm just gonna put that out there. It was really, really bad, and it makes me really, really angry. And just the way that it tried to simplify major political differences. It was like a caricature of like the tight, like uptight liberal woman and like the, conservative guy who's, laid back but very into his guns, and like how they basically meet in the middle by not talking. It doesn't even prove its own thesis. I don't like it, and I don't recommend it, and I wish I hadn't read it. That was followed by Necessary Trouble by Sarah Jaffe. This is a nonfiction book that follows the most current political revolutions from 2008 forward, so the Tea Party, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, all of that, and brings it up to 2016 when the book was published. The audiobook of this book is so bad. I talked about this in my last supplementals episode. The audiobook was so bad. They mispronounced words, and then the thing is that it claims to be a open-minded, look at all political movements across the spectrum, but then in the end comes out with a really, really strong Bernie Sanders style socialism agenda. I didn't like that. If you're gonna have an agenda, that's fine, but tell me about it up front, because it colors the entire rest of the book. So that was frustrating, and I mean, maybe it's a better experience if you read it and know where it's gonna go, but I didn't, and I listened to it, and it was not great. After that came Hang the Moon by Alexandria Bellefleur. This is a follow-up to a book that Michaela and I both read and reviewed, and I liked that one enough to read the next one. This one was okay. It was one of those where it's the brother of one of the girls, and he has had a crush on one of her best friends for like his entire life, and she shows up after a long time away and realizes, oh, he's grown up, and then they get together. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but I didn't really find it to have as much substance as the first one, so it was very cute, but it was like whatever. That was followed by Isn't It Bromantic by Lyssa Kay Adams. This is the latest book in the Bromance Book Club series, and the Russian finally gets his own book. You find out after all this time that he's been married, but it was a marriage of technically convenience, but like he's loved her the entire time. But he thought that she just needed, a green card to get to America, and so he's kind of left her alone, and she thought that he thought of her as a burden, but she also actually loved him the entire time. But so it's just like miscommunication. They're married, and there's a whole thing with illegal cheese. I love these books, and I think each one gets better. So I highly recommend the entire series, but I was waiting for this character to get his own story, and I'm so glad. He's just been a delight for the first 3 books, and I'm happy that he gets his happy ending. That was followed by Bombshell by Sarah MacLean. Sarah MacLean is maybe, like, for me, the top of the historical romance writers list. I did my tier ranking romance video forever ago, and she was on top of it, and she's still on top of it in my heart. And this is the first book in a brand new series she's starting called Hell's Bells. I did an ARC review of that, so you can see more thoughts and feelings on that one. But basically the premise of this series is a group of women who are using their status as outcasts or whatever in society to very subtly undermine the sexist socioeconomic things that are foundational in their society, and using their status as wallflowers or people who you're like, oh, you'll never get married because you're weird or whatever, and using that to undermine society. So I really enjoyed the first book, but honestly, I was introduced to characters that I'm more excited for their story later on. So I think this is going to be a great series. Side note on that, because of Bombshell, characters in Bombshell are related to characters in my favorite Sarah MacLean book of all time, which is Day of the Duchess. So I did a reread of that one. That one is older and it shows up in my romance tier ranking. I think it's Sarah MacLean's best book, but I was comparing them and finding out whether or not the thing that happens in Bombshell is actually planned. And I don't think it is, but I digress. Then I finished Zero Fail, The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service by Carol Leonig. This book is about a part of our government that I never think of, but is terribly important because the Secret Service are all that stand between potentially our president and a bullet. And it is about the entire history of the Secret Service, but particularly how in recent decades it started to fall down on the job and it really needs our help. And it was very well researched and very interesting. I would recommend it. I know when it hit the talk shows, people were telling like the most lurid tales from it, and it kind of made it seem kind of clickbaity. It's not. I think it's just another example of parts of our government being incredibly antiquated. So yeah, we need to fix the Secret Service on top of everything else. I then finished the Beneath series by Megan March. That's Beneath These Shadows and Beneath These Truth. Beneath These Shadows is the one that connects back to the world of the Dirty Billionaire, which connects all of her worlds kind of like together, which is really interesting, but I already kind of talked about that series, so I'm not going to go over that more. And now we've hit some nonfiction that I haven't made into videos yet. The first being First Friends, The Powerful, Unsung, and Unelected People Who Shaped Our Presidents by Gary Ginsberg. I wanted more from this book. It's vignettes of relationships that in some cases have been covered by biographies that I've read, and in some cases really haven't. I think my biggest takeaway from this is that I really, really want to get around to reading a book on Franklin Pierce because his relationship with Nathaniel Hawthorne is really interesting. But I don't know, there were a lot of like, you know, a chapter on this relationship, a chapter on this relationship, and then there really wasn't a strong conclusion to it. I don't know. It just seemed like a collection of short stories meant to say, there are people who have influenced presidents who weren't elected. I am doing a really, really slow buddy read of the entire Bridgerton series with a friend. I've mentioned that before. And so I read 2 of those back to back, An Offer from a Gentleman and Romancing Mr. Bridgerton by Julia Quinn. Eventually, maybe I'll make a full video of these, but right now they've been slowly declining after so book 1 is okay, book 2 is the best. And then they slowly decline in quality. I think hitting a low with Eloise's story, which is not one of these, but I don't know. I'm having a lot of thoughts about this series that I will hopefully put into a larger video. But An Offer from a Gentleman is Benedict's story, and it's like Cinderella, essentially. It's basically what it is. And then Romancing Mr. Bridgerton is Colin's story, and that is him turning around one day and being like, Penelope is marriageable, and then marrying her. Not a fan really of either of those. Then I read Arusha and the End of Time by Roshni Chokshi. Michaela and I did a full review of this, but this is a middle grade book by an author that I adore. I did not adore this book. I think the audiobook undermined it, but it is a contemporary fantasy book about a girl who unleashes some Indian doomsday. It's based on Indian mythology, and that's really interesting, but the audiobook narrator is a lot to get over. Did not like that, but anything that comes out of Rick Riordan Presents is really interesting. I just wish that I had read it and not listened to it. So then I read The Layover by Lacey Walden. I actually really enjoyed this book, and I don't know why I didn't do a review of it on its own, This is a story about a woman who is engaged, and she has been a flight stewardess for her entire life, but her fiance wants her to be home more often, so this is going to be her last flight. And one of the pilots on this flight is a guy who she has had a grudge against for a really long time, but they end up having a flight canceled. They have a layover on a tropical island, and things come out that the pilot isn't as terrible as she thinks he is, and her fiance is more terrible than she thinks he is. So this was a really sweet story. It was really cute and wonderful, and the relationship between the two characters and the things that they're going through in their own lives are just really well done. And I would recommend it. I think for me it kind of went under the radar, but it's just really sweet and set in a tropical paradise. So moving towards winter, that might be exactly what you need. I then read another nonfiction book, Bring the War Home, The White Power Movement and Paramilitary America by Kathleen Belew. This book, I think, was her thesis. It was published by a university press and it reads like one, but it traces the rise of the paramilitary militia movement in America from the end of the Vietnam War till today. And so while it's very dense, it was very interesting. It's something that I've not learned that much about, and Catherine Belew's point is that a lot of the movements that she talks about have been considered as separate entities when really they're all in connection and talking to each other. So it's not just interesting for the knowledge, but also the interconnectivity that she brings up. So again, very dense, was definitely a thesis, but I enjoyed I took in quite a bit of knowledge from it. So I then got up on some Lauren Lane books that I'd not read. I've brought her up before. I recently reviewed one of her newest books, which I will link probably at this point down in the description as an arc, but this was her Wolves of Wall Street. No, wolves are involved, but I think she had to call it like Wall Street or something. There's Hot Acid, Hard Sell, and Huge Deal, and most of the dudes in this ones, they are hotshot Wall Street executives who learn to tone down their crazy lives and find some love. Lauren Lane is just a solid romance author for me. These I don't think were her best work, but I was looking for something that would just, I knew that I could come out the other end and enjoy. And so, you know, they were kind of interchangeable. There's not one that stands out. There's not one that I can really even remember the plot of, but they were solid and they were good romance novels that they were just good. And everyone needs at least one author they can just turn to and say, I know you won't do me wrong. And for me, that's Lauren Lane. Some of them are exceptional, but most of them are just good. So moving on to a romance novel that I did review. I reviewed an arc of A Spot of Trouble by Terry Wilson. This is a story involving some beautiful Dalmatians and a not so meet cute when our female and male leads meet on a dog park beach, and the female lead believes that because she has had the only Dalmatian in this small town for forever, that he is trying to dog nap her dog when in fact it is his Dalmatian. They do not get off on the right foot. Then they find out that they are on opposite sides of the baseball rivalry between the police station and the fire station. And yeah, it's a small town book, Dalmatians, but the thing that I can't handle about this book, and I talk about it more in my review, is that the girl in this one is just portrayed as like klutzy, ditzy, does not have her life together, and the guy is like supposed to be similar, but it's not. There's a lot of secondhand embarrassment for me for her in this book, and I did not enjoy it. I did not like the way that her character was written at all. So I finished August with Bush by Jean Edward Smith. This is a book that I talked about in my last Presidents, and it was also very weird. It claimed to be a critical but even-handed review of the presidency of the second Bush, George W., but starts off with a phrase that's essentially America has never been more underserved by a president than it was by George W. Bush. So the writing and the blurb did not jive, but it was an interesting book, and I finished it right when our troops were leaving the Middle East, and it was a very weird reading experience. So you can watch that for more, the President's episode. I only read 9 books in September, so we're almost there. The first one I read was actually a YA fantasy, Defy the Night by Bridget Kemmerer. Bridget Kemmerer is an author that I really enjoy for her Beauty and the Beast retelling trilogy, but this is the first book in a new duology. It does involve a deadly plague, so if you're not feeling plague books, it might not be for you, but I really did enjoy it. I enjoyed the world, the romance, the action, the adventure, the gray, interesting discussion, and I did a full review, so you can watch that for more. Then I read Hero of Two Worlds. This is a biography on the Marquis de Lafayette by Mike Duncan from the Revolutions podcast. I did listen to the audiobook, which he does narrate, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting to get a view of Lafayette both before and after the Revolution. Oftentimes in American history, he's put quite close to the sidelines, and I mean, he's entertaining in Hamilton, but honestly, his life after the Revolution with everything that goes on in France is so much more interesting, honestly, than his role during the Revolution, and how he really did choose to live his revolutionary principles for the rest of his life. That'll show up in a supplementals eventually, but if you haven't gotten your hands on it yet, it is a new release, but it's really interesting and I enjoyed it, and it's very engaging. It really is. Then I read The Rival by Kendall Ryan. Apparently, I don't remember this book at all. I think it's a sports romance, but it left zero impression. I then read When the Center Held, The American Presidency and Gerald Ford. This book, I knew going into it that I probably wasn't going to find it great, but I've been having a really hard time finding a biography on Gerald Ford. I'll probably talk about this at length when it eventually shows up in a President's episode, but it's more like how Rumsfeld helped advise President Ford. It's not great, and especially after reading Bush, I was not feeling super charitable towards Donald Rumsfeld. So this book is it's not about Gerald Ford. It really, I mean, it says it is, but it isn't. So I'm really upset that that's the biography that I ended up settling on, but I'll circle back to Ford eventually, hopefully. I then read 2 books by Alicia Ray, Play With Me and Risk and Reward. These are romance novellas, and there's a 3rd one to finish out the trilogy, and I cared not enough to finish it. They were essentially filler. I started them because it was about 2 people who, dated as teenagers, reconnecting as adults. And like I said earlier, I really like second chance romances. I think that there's a lot of potential in them. These books are pretty blah. Then I read Once More Upon a Time by Roshni Chokshi. I did an ARC review of this. It's not really an ARC review though, because this book has existed as an Audible original audiobook for a while, but it's now out in print. It is a fantasy fairy tale retelling / reimagining. It's Roshni Chokshi, so it's amazingly well written. The number of fairy tales that she manages to fit in and turn on their head in a novella are astronomical, but it did have some faults. But if you are a fantasy fairy tale fan, it's definitely a great way to spend some of your time. And especially if you can look through and be like, oh, she just mentioned that fairy tale, and that fairy tale is great. I loved that, but I think it might be better as an audiobook. I'm not sure. I've not listened to it because I don't have Audible. So, I don't know. Second to last book I read in September was the Xhex, ostensibly by Aaron Sterling, but actually by Rachel Hawkins, who wrote some of my favorite popcorny books from my YA hood. And she is now doing an adult romance where a witch hexes her boyfriend when she finds out that he is engaged to someone else, shockingly. And then it happens to be that 10 years later, he comes back to the town and the curse takes effect. And basically they almost destroy the world and they have to work together to save it. So it's the perfect book for this season. I did a whole review of it that you can watch. But yeah, basically if you could dunk this in a pumpkin spice latte, which I don't like, but I understand 'tis the season, it's just like the perfect witchy, no stress, fun romance. So there's that. Final book I read in September was A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. It's hard for me to talk about this without the context of the next two books, which I did read, but I read them in October. Michaela and I had so many thoughts and feelings about this book and the books after it that we did an entire hour-long discussion. And yeah, this was not the Hades and Persephone retelling of my dream. Should have a lot of trigger warnings on it, but you can watch that elsewhere. Okay, we made it to the end. That is all of the books that I read in Q3. Thank you for hanging out with me through not one but two camera overheats and my partner coming home and the clicking in the background and the cat making noise earlier. And it's been an adventure, and so has this quarter. But those are all the books that I read, and I cannot wait, honestly, for Q4 because with my PhD, it is 100% going to be smaller because I am dying. I'm still working full-time and starting this PhD, and I'm very tired, and I honestly can't believe that I haven't missed a Monday posting yet. I'm sure it will happen someday, but today is not that day. So thank you so much for this long video, and I'll see you guys next time.